One. Okay, I'm Terence,
I'm Patrick.
and our project is on VyOS, the network operating system. For our presentation, we're going to go over the basics of VyOS, go into a little bit of background of VyOS, and then go into more features and details about it. And so what is VyOS? VyOS is an open source Debian-based operating system for network devices and machines such as routers. So that means it's Linux-based, so most of the commands that you enter like a Linux-based system, you can put into VyOS. This operating system came after discontinuation of the VyOS core project in 2013. So that means it's actually a fork of the VyOS core project. And so they're kind of like the same thing. It's just more of the community has got more involved into the VyOS core project and spent off their own type of software. As I said before, it has a large and growing open source community dedicated to the development of it. You can see a lot of things. You can do a quick Google on VyOS, and then you'll see a GitHub page for it. You'll see that there's many types of different projects for it, and it's all surrounded around building more features for it. And it also has several features for support on enterprise networks and infrastructure. So if you're someone in the IT industry, this isn't just necessarily a piece of software you can put in like your home router. This can also services a network, like your network infrastructure for your enterprise.
So as you mentioned, this was a fork of the VyOS core project. So that was an open source networking system that supported features such as IP routing, firewalls, and VPNs. They forked together in 2013, and it was a Debian-based Linux distro. It had a web-based GUI, and it could also be implemented into cloud environments or virtual environments such as AWS or AWS.
So VyOS system requirements. So the system requirements for VyOS aren't extremely heavy. As you can see, the minimum requirements for it are about 1,000 megabytes of RAM and 2 gigabytes of storage on your system. So you don't need any superior hardware in order to run it. But of course, as you put this in, use more resources of it, and the number of devices you connect to it, of course, the requirements for it, such as RAM and storage, that number continues to build on it. And then this operating system, it can be installed onto a virtual machine, hardware machine, such as like a PC, or like a server PC or a server hardware. Of course, a router that's compatible with it. And the reason it can be installed on virtual machines is for cloud computing. So in cloud environments, it can be installed in some sort of way. I'm not too knowledgeable on that, but downloads on it can be found on the source page for VyOS. And there's multiple images for it. You can see there's like many different versions and releases for it, each with like different kind of features. And then I also put the link in there, so if anybody's interested, you can check it out for yourself.
So a little more about the installation. To install it, it requires a .iso file of VyOS. And when you do run through that, it'll go through the installation process, and it'll use it'll install the image on the user hard drive. While it's still a free operating system, there's still a few features that require maintenance and upgrades that are require paid subscriptions. And then otherwise, you can install the booting through USB with image or through PXE boot.
So some things to consider when installing VyOS into your system, or if you're considering implementing it. Make sure that the router, as I said before, is supported, and that you're able to actually install the operating system onto it. So I don't think if you like went to Best Buy, I don't think you can just buy a router and then install whatever operating system you want on it. I might be wrong. There might be some in there, but in the case that you do want to do it, make sure that the router you have supports it. Also on the BIOS information page, they even have some custom builds you can do. They give you like pointers for what kind of hardware to get. So if you were thinking about building your own server hardware to run this, they actually do have a page where you can find the correct parts to build it, and then it gives you more information from there. And then also, if you're putting this into a cloud environment, consider the cost you might accumulate while using the resources. I know with most cloud resources, as you use more features and services and you get more clients, that cost starts to go up more, and it can start to become more expensive as you accumulate more devices and clients. So keep that in mind. And also for virtual environments, those are also effective if you install this into like a VM. Even though you can like set the amount of RAM and storage for it, make sure that the host machine can handle that the resources that you're trying to use. So even if you're like using a lot, make sure that you're not putting too much stress onto your machine.
So once you do have VyOS installed, you'll notice that once you boot, it's pretty similar to most Linux BIOS to get it running. And then you also notice that it's similar directories also seen in Linux. It's like we said in the beginning, it's really resembles most Linux distros anyways.
Okay, so BIOS has two modes of operation for configuration and management of the operating system, and that is operation mode and configuration mode. So operation mode allows for one to enter commands into the command line interface to do some of the regular system tasks that you do on any Linux-based system. So that could be writing to different directories, creating different directories, just going into different directories, or writing files. So most of any of the like terminal commands that you would do if you were like for say in like Ubuntu or something. And then to view some of the specific commands that the operating system has for itself, all you would do is enter the question mark symbol. And it'll give you a complete list of the commands, similar to like how you would do with the man command in Linux, like so the manual page. So that way you can go through that, and it has like the exact same interface where you can like go through the text document. Like for instance, to exit the document, you just press Q. And as I said before, there's some kind of things you can do with the command line interface. For instance, like putting in tab when viewing a document. And then the other mode is configuration mode. So in this mode, a user will then need to like configure the router for any services, any of the interfaces of the router. And so this is where you'll enter the like some of the networking specific commands for VyOS, such as set interface, which will set the IP address for the interface you're trying to do for that specific endpoint in terms of networking. And then VyOS uses like a unified configuration file to store the system's configuration. And so for this, when you're using VyOS and you put in the commands for the configuration you want, they're always saved. And that's in the instance that you might be working on like a future project, for example, and then you may not be ready to implement it right now, but maybe a week or two down the line, you may want to implement it then. And so that's a nice feature I saw with VyOS, to save in multiple configuration files for later use. And this also allows like for you to use the base system as a template. So if in the case that you have a config that you want to like manipulate a little bit, because you might be dealing with something that's similar later on down the line, you can actually grab that configuration that you made within the config directory and BIOS, and then make changes from there. And then there are 3 types of configurations while you're in configuration mode. The first one is active config. So this is the configuration that is loaded and is running. That means that while you're running VyOS, whatever configuration that you may have last used, that's the one that's being used throughout the whole network infrastructure. So if you have like 3 interfaces being in that configuration that were being used in the active configuration, that's what's being running right now. And then the next type of configuration is a working configuration. This is a configuration that is being modified, that's in the process. So while you do have like an active configuration, the working configuration is while you're making changes to something else. And while you're doing those changes are not implemented yet until you issue the commit command, which I'll go into a little bit more detail of. But even if you do another type of configuration, it's not always implemented right away. Sometimes it has to be committed in certain situations first before you can use it. And then the next one is a save config. So this is relating back to the configuration files that you may use for VyOS. So like if you were working on another project in the future and then wanted to use that configuration for later use, this is where you would have the save config. And that allows for keeping multiple configurations. And then going back to the commit commands and the commit command. So when you do finish doing your configuration, and if that's the one that you want to have running at the moment, you have to issue the commit command to VyOS. And then that one will become the active and loaded run. That will become the active configuration at the time. And then in the case for save config, so if you want to save a configuration, it's simple, just enter the command save. And so that kind of goes back into like the simplicity of VyOS and why someone might want to use it. And then we have this one.
Yeah, all right. So then some simple troubleshooting for VyOS, like seen in almost all OSs, you do have the ping command and the trace route, which can be used to verify connectivity or see what route it could be hopping through servers for whatever reason you have. And then a little more in depth, if you're having problems with BIOS, there's the monitoring network traffic or bandwidth. With the monitor command, it's, let me double check. The monitor command, you can specify an interface to report back all the traffic that's going through it. So if you were to do a ping and you did a monitor traffic, it would show you all of the ping requests, the locations for the IP and the destination. And I think it actually shows the 3-way or the handshake numbers, the sequence and ID, in case that was any beneficial to what you were troubleshooting. And then secondly, the monitor command itself is a command that updates every 2 seconds. So if you were to run a monitor interface, it would report back to you every 2 seconds with its updated connectivity or traffic that is flowing through it.
And so then more info on the configuration and operational modes. VyOS has documentation with a plethora of information for templating for any of your network-based needs. They even give you like a complete guide for how to implement a certain type of network topology you're trying to do, or even a specific service. Some examples like IPv4 routing, doing open shortest path first routing, and then also setting up VPNs on your network. And these are known as, instead of templates, they're called configuration blueprints. So that link that you see right there, that's the link to see some of those configuration blueprints. And that way someone can see which one like plays best to their needs, or if they're just curious to see how to implement it for themselves, just do some testing.
So some of the features of VyOS, VyOS has many common features that you would see with other common network operating systems, DCHP and DNS, obviously, the SSH, and then the firewalls. And then if we look more into the security, the OS right out of the box provides stateful firewalls for both IPv4 and IPv6. So whatever traffic your company could be receiving, it'll get analyzed and searched for potential traffic risks. And also, I believe the firewall is a version of Linux Net Filter, which is the stateful firewall that it uses, and it implements all kinds of network address, all the port translations needed that your traffic would be using, and it allows for APIs for third-party extensions if you do have any need for those in your company. And then looking at the firewall some more, what we have is groups. If you had like different portions of your business that you needed separate for different abilities within the firewall, maybe sending or receiving traffic, instead of having to do individual to every person, you could just simply do it to maybe the entire finance section, and then give the accounting section, which is probably the same thing, but you get me, give that a whole different group of firewall rules, and it saves time because you don't have to go to each person individually. And then, like we were mentioning before, it comes prepared with multiple VPN and tunneling protocols. This is really beneficial for any company because based on your size, or if you're looking to be remote in any possible way, you're pretty much set up for every possible trafficking system or method that you could need. It's all going to be in the box ready for you in VyOS. And then, oh, sorry, can you go to the next?
Yeah.
One after that one, yeah, thank you. And then the OS also offers the main 3 routing protocols, which are BGP, OSPF, and RIP. I wish I would have included there was a diagram that I saw, and it was pretty much explaining the size of your company versus the devices you have and the benefits of using which of the 3. And this is just beneficial for a company to have these 3 options available because, like I was saying, if you have a certain size and you need a certain protocol to get work done at the best pace, you'll be able to implement it with ease. And then on the next slide was just a basic firewall configuration that I found on the VyOS website. If you were to type this in right off the bat, it would provide you with a secure firewall.
Some of the benefits of VyOS are a high availability through virtual routing redundancy protocol. So what I saw with this is the ability of the OS to pull resources from other virtual machines within a network. So in the case that you might be losing like some power or resources in order to keep your network at a high availability, since we know that's important with most industries and enterprises, it will gather some of the resources from some of the other virtual machines in the network, or virtual routers in this case, to better help keep that high availability. Another benefit is it has customized development. So depending on what your company may need or your enterprise may need, you can get like custom-made versions of VyOS in regards to certain services you may need. So like, for instance, if you need VyOS for some type of cloud environment within your enterprise and you need like a special type of infrastructure for it, there are some that they do have like customizable versions within the commercial version. That's not included in the free version. And then also it has great scalability. So as you do continue to increase the number of devices, the number of services, and the number of resources that your company needs, it's able to continue to scale with that and keep that high availability along with it, and also be able to maintain the level of service you previously had as you continue to like grow. And then it's also easy to deploy. you don't really have to do too much from what I was seeing from the documentation in terms of installation, but of course that also depends on what your network infrastructure may be. So depending on that, but in terms of if you're maybe like implementing this on like a small scale, maybe even to a more medium scale, it's not as difficult as you for like some other types of network operating systems.
So some common issues with VyOS, like any OS, there's always going to be vulnerabilities. I think, if I'm correct, VyOS in its history only has 2 registered CVE vulnerabilities, and both of those were actually pretty severe. I think they both led to an attacker being able to use sudo, not beneficial at all. And most of the vulnerabilities that can come from this are going to be from the user possibly setting up the wireless configuration or the firewall. If you do look at the VyOS website, similar to that slide earlier with the firewall rules, they provide in-depth, clear explanation of how to set up nearly everything on their OS with secure and every method that you could look for. So vulnerabilities are possible. However, the company themselves does well at providing what's needed to be successful and secure for someone that might have no clue out of the box. They could literally probably go to the website and go step by step walk through and be able to secure their firewall and their operating system properly.
So some issues with VyOS. I can't really speak much on the security issues. Patrick covered most of that. But in terms of issues with VyOS, I would say since this is a rather new project, being that it was created 10 years ago in 2013, there's little documentation on the open source project. Even though the site gives you a plethora of information to better inform yourself about it, it's still rather small for some as compared to like other open source projects. So there may be details that you might not be able to get answered right away. So that may rely on the individual themselves to go do some of their own research. So that includes like going out more with the open source community for this project. But there is one issue with the install with VyOS. So when you first install it, sometimes you may get just a straight black screen, and you won't get any type of response from the system. And so it's just a complete black screen. And you may have to restart the install for that. And that's caused by Grub.
So VyOS is often compared to pfSense. The OS is usually compared with, I was just saying, it's compared with OS Sense. If you look at VyOS compared to them, pfSense is primarily a firewall that you would implement that can also do routing, and then vice versa. VyOS is a router that can do firewall activities. Honestly, that's the only thing I know about that. Do you have anything better for that you would be able to cover?
I would say just like, yeah, more or less of what you said. So they each kind of do the exact same job, just one does one better than the other. So VyOS is just mainly used for routing. So in the case that you have already have some type of firewall in place besides pfSense, or if that you just need a firewall for your network and you want to put that on top of VyOS, then in that case you would do that. And then vice versa for pfSense, if there's some type of routing technology that you use in or there's like some advanced routing, because I know pfSense may not be able to do some of the advanced routing features as VyOS. So pfSense, you might want to implement that as your main firewall technology, and then have some other type of technology or software for doing the routing.
So then, if you ever were looking to contribute to the VyOS, like we said, it is an open source project. Anyone can help further the development in any way that they are able to. This project is dedicated to implementing more features and creating more versions in the future. It's definitely not an end product. They're looking to keep going. And then if you were looking to contribute or anything about the project, they do have a GitHub, which pretty much lists everything about the project that you would need to know.
Yeah. And then as with like any open source project, even though this is like a new thing, a new technology in terms of when it came out, in order for it to stay at the level that it is and continue to get the support, it does need community developers to come and make changes and help further develop the project. And then here are some references for VyOS. Mostly it's GitHub and the site itself and some documentation that they have in more detail versus what we have covered. We've basically just given you a summary, but if you would like to do your own reading, of course, you can do that. I would recommend go checking out the GitHub page if you are someone who's into open source development, open source software, and want to also, this is a good way to help get your coding skills up. I would go check out the GitHub and you might learn a few things about networking also. But that is it.